Hello, Pod A students. Today we are talking about Chapter 2, Section 3, the distribution of power in governments today. So we've been talking about nation states, we've been talking about forms of government. Just like we talked about how in every nation state some form of government exists, in almost all nation states government power is exercised at a minimum of two levels, national and regional. In our country, in the United States, we refer to regions as states. So you're pretty familiar with this. Other countries might use other names, provinces, lands, departments. How the power is distributed in these two levels, national and regional, depends on the system of government the country has, whether that's unitary, federal, or confederal. So we're going to talk about each of those three systems today. So, kind of just said this, in almost all nation states, we've got two levels, national and regional. Power is distributed between them, depends on the system. So we're going to talk about unitary, federal, and confederal systems in terms of how power is distributed. The first is unitary. So again, your book is really good at giving you pretty good graphics. So refer to the graphics for each of these systems to try to help you kind of visualize what that might look like. So in a unitary system, power is highly centralized. So there's a constitution, there's some body of law that is going to give the central government, typically national government, power. Regional governments may also be created to help carry out the policies that are created by that one national government. The main advantage here is that it's going to promote unity. All of the countries, all of the parts, the regions, are following the laws set by that national or central government. So you're going to have some unity there. Everybody knows what to follow. Typically, the disadvantage here is that most unitary nations have discovered that too much centralization, too much central government or national power is not good in practice. So policies that might fit one region of the country might not work as well in another. So we also see in that situation officials working at the national level. So you're working in the central government, there's all these different regions of a country, especially one with a larger population. You don't really know the need of every town and village. So as a result, a lot of the unitary states have decentralized to some degree. So the book that your textbook gives Japan as an example, and you could read about that a little bit further in your text. The second system is the federal system. This is the one you need to remember. This is what we have in our own country. So it's important for you to remember, especially when it comes to a test, the distribution of power in our government in the United States is federal. We have a federal system of government. So in this circumstance, power is divided between the central government and regional governments. Again, regions in our example of the United States are states. So all 50 states have their own form of government. They have a state government. However, we also follow the rules set forth by our federal, national, central government. Okay, so this system is most likely to be adopted in countries with a large population, diverse populations especially. Think of the United States. We have 50 different regions or states. There are different types of resources in those states. There's different populations of people, there's different ethnic backgrounds, there's different religious backgrounds, there's different climates or, again, resources, job opportunities that make each of those regions or states unique. So the advantage of a federal system here is that it gives those regional governments or states flexibility to meet the needs that are unique of that diverse group or their particular state. It also guides us and helps keep us unified by having those national or central government laws. So for one example, in our system in the United States, the national government has the fixed responsibility of protecting the nation. We have a U.S. military. That military is responsible for protecting all regions, all 50 states. However, we've given some powers to the regional government, responsibilities like setting up schools. The federal government in this country does not set up one nationwide standard for schools. They let the states decide that. So every individual state has the responsibility and the opportunity to create standards for education. That could be graduation requirements, attendance requirements, what types of courses are offered, all of that is left up to the states. Okay, so the disadvantage here of this federal system, the downside is you can have competing laws from one state to the next. There's not that unity from state to state. A great example of this, which we'll talk about when we talk about voting, is voting laws. So states are responsible for setting up voting laws and practices for their state. We do not have a unified system of voting. So when it comes to like voter requirements, some states like Wisconsin require voter ID. Minnesota does not. So although it's great that states have been allowed and given that flexibility to meet the needs of their state, that creates sometimes problems in a system like voting, where we're all voting for president, but every state's system, their ballot, their rules, the time that the polls are open is different from state to state, which can lead to some inconsistency and some competition between those particular states. The third system is a confederal system. Power in a confederal system is decentralized. So the U.S. was the first modern country to adopt a federal system of government, like we just talked about on the slide before. However, before we had that federal system, our first American Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, which we'll talk more about in Chapter 3, created a confederal system of government. So you might be familiar with this from U.S. history. You should have talked about the Articles of Confederation and how they led to ultimately the writing of the Constitution. But with that Articles of Confederation, they created a confederal system of government. So in this system, power resided with the regions, those independent states. The regions granted only as much power to the national government as they felt was needed to maintain security and to coordinate some activities. So it was really the states, in that case, or the regional governments that had the majority of the power. It created a weak central government. Remember with the Articles of Confederation that we were coming out of being ruled by a monarch, King George, kind of tyrannical, absolute monarchy. We wanted more freedom. The founders were extremely concerned about having too much central power, having one person with all that centralized power, or one part of government with centralized power. They were really worried that the states were going to lose rights. So they created this kind of intentionally weak central government. Although there were advantages, like allowing states to unite without giving up any power, it allowed them flexibility in meeting those local needs. By limiting those powers of the central government, they were reducing, again, that authoritarian, tyrannical, absolute monarchy. However, the states end up reconsidering their choice. As we know, we get to the Constitution, we get to a federal system of government. They just realized that that central government that they had created with the Articles of Confederation was too weak to meet the needs of the nation as a whole. It didn't have the power to end any fighting between the states. You could end up with war or conflict or fighting between the states. And at that time period especially, it was unworkable, and it kind of threatened the survival of this new democracy. So today there is no nation state organized as a confederation. There's some organizations like the European Union or the EU that's modeled after a confederal system. So in that particular example, member nations of the EU give some power to the EU government, like control over border trade, cross-border trade. But they remain a sovereign nation, and they can leave the EU at any time, which we're starting to see that happen. Brexit, that there are countries that are leaving that European Union and kind of maintaining their own independence, their own sovereignty. So that is one modern example of a confederal system, but we don't see it in a nation state or country today. So as a review, to kind of quickly go back and just review, went too far, sorry. In a unitary system, we see a very strong centralized government. In a federal system, we see power that is divided between the central government and the regional governments. And in a confederal system, we see decentralized power. So we see regional governments having power that they then give to the central government. Hopefully that helps you get a better understanding of the distribution of power in governments today. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.